Hello everyone, and welcome to the third development diary for our upcoming major expansion, All Under Heaven. I'm Jacob, a community manager with Paradox Studio Black, and today I'll be reading the words of Dan Brokov, one of our programmers and the feature steward for the mechanics of China. In today's development diary, we'll be covering the gameplay mechanics for China. We'll be trying to get into as many of the details as we can about what we have developed so far. Because yes, the DLC is very much still being developed and being iterated on right now, and we want to hear your thoughts on what we have so far. Since China is the biggest focus of All Under Heaven, many others are working on it as well, so we'll be hearing from multiple people throughout this development diary. Hold on to your hats, it's going to be a chunky one. We may repeat some of the things that have already been revealed in previous dev diaries for clarity or cohesion. If anything seems contradictory from those earlier dev diaries, please ask and we will attempt to clarify. Now let's begin with China, the central state. One key understanding of Imperial China in the medieval era is that it is a sophisticated bureaucracy, organized and centralized in ways seen nowhere else in the world at this time. It has many layers, ranging from the lowly district head to county magistrates, prefects, and provincial governors. Yet those are but arms of the bureaucracy. In the central capital we have the heart of power, the central ministers, the Grand Chancellor, and finally, the Emperor himself. We want you, the player, to be able to rise up within this power structure, or perhaps even challenge it, be that from the inside or the outside. The government type for China is the celestial government. Celestial here being a reference to the mandate of heaven, the right to rule held by the emperor, who is also known as the Son of Heaven. Unique to this government type is the way that titles under the emperor are managed and distributed. Similarly to the existing administrative government type, these titles are given to the candidate who holds the highest score whenever such a title is vacated. In contrast to Byzantium, however, the scoring calculation in celestial governments is heavily dictated by the merit rank you hold. Your government accreditation level, if you will. You can still spend influence, but you will not be able to obtain a higher position unless you have reached a sufficient rank of merit. Having reached a sufficient rank out of the 9 ranks of merit available will mean having access to, and being expected to fill, positions of a certain tier, with prefectures equivalent to counties, provinces equivalent to duchies, and circuits equivalent to kingdoms, requiring a higher and higher rank of merit. The duchy level usually does not exist this way in medieval China, but we've added it here for gameplay reasons. As you have seen in previous dev diaries, the Chinese map also has de jure empires, but these generally will not exist within a stable era. Instead, the highest point in any career is the position of minister, an empire tier type of position that is covered in our upcoming section here. Since China is so large, the Son of Heaven relies on his bureaucracy to fill vacant positions. While he can directly intervene if the situation requires, positions will generally be directly filled upon being vacated through this rank system instead of titles reverting to the emperor like they otherwise do in Byzantium. The central government of a hegemony tier celestial government is an impressive feat of bureaucracy, and where some say the true power of the Chinese Empire could be found. Throughout Chinese medieval history, there were many departments and ministries that made up this central bureaucracy, and we're opening up their leaders as titles and positions that players can vie for as the crown achievement of power in their civilian career. Only those with a very high merit rank will even be allowed to put their name forward for consideration. These department heads and ministers will replace the regular council of the emperor, and they will work similarly but also differently to councilors. First off, ministers are not appointed by the emperor directly when vacated. Instead, they are also filled by the same mechanics that select governors for administrative vassal titles within the empire. You can lobby to make yourself the next Minister of Revenue, but there might be many other powerful political entities competing for these titles. The balance of power and the exact titles that existed for these varied throughout our time period. Generally speaking, the 3 departments and 6 ministry systems that existed from the Sui dynasty to the Yuan dynasty is what we have taken as the main structure for the ministers in All Under Heaven. Additionally, we have selected 2 other powerful titles to be present, the Grand Chancellor and the Imperial Censor. Mechanically, these positions will have landless titles of the Empire rank, to signify their power second only to the Emperor himself. These positions will act as go-betweens between the governors and the emperor himself, representing the delegated power of the administration. The emperor will often interact more directly with his ministers than specific governors, of which he has many. Many interactions that would usually target your liege will instead target a minister within Imperial China. One way for these ministers to influence the state is through great projects, which are collaborative projects that characters can start and others can contribute to. More about great projects specifically in a later dev diary. For example, the Minister of Works could start an infrastructure improvement project targeting multiple circuits. Or the Minister of War could start a great project to begin preparing for a large military campaign. Ministers will of course receive funds, treasury, and a salary to be effective administrators, which they can use to pursue projects or agendas. Also called the Prime Minister or Zhai Jiang, the Grand Chancellor is one of the most powerful political positions in Imperial China. They were the head of the entire civil administration and effectively served as the emperor's chief executive officer, resulting them often being seen as the highest-ranking official below the emperor himself. This title gives many powers, and in some situations is on an equivalent level to the emperor. This title is also at the top of the Diarch Regency list, stepping in when the emperor becomes unavailable. Leading an oversight institution called the Censorate, the Imperial Censor has the responsibility to investigate corruption, abuse of power, and nepotism within the empire. They also offer advice to the emperor, and uniquely they could challenge ministers, the Grand Chancellor, or even the emperor himself. Mechanically, this role is very similar to the Spy Master, but lifted up even more in power by the ability to publicly challenge anyone in the bureaucracy, in both matters of illegal behavior, but also moral behavior. Other minister roles are less powerful than the Grand Chancellor or Imperial Censor, but more powerful than any other official in the administration of Imperial China. The Minister of Personnel oversees civil service appointments, evaluations, promotions, and dismissals. The Minister of Revenue handles census data, taxation, land distribution, and state finances. The Minister of Rights manages state ceremonies, rituals, foreign relations, including tributaries, and the imperial examination system. The Minister of War directs military appointments, strategy, logistics, and defense. The Minister of Justice administers laws, judicial review, prisons, and punishment of criminals. And the Minister of Works oversees public worlds, construction, engineering, and infrastructure. The emperor is not without power towards his ministers and top officials, of course. He can even bestow the status of favored minister on any of them, granting them even more treasury to work with, amongst other benefits. Similar to the administrative system used in Byzantium that was introduced in Roads to Power, the celestial government has province types, designations that you can give titles, such as the kingdom-sized circuit, that specialize that title for a specific purpose. In contrast to the Byzantine system, the number of each of these that you can have is often limited by the circuit type itself, the Dynastic Cycle era, or specific laws. We have created two primary categories of circuit types, civilian and military. These correspond to the two career paths that you can choose within the machinery of the Chinese state. The main difference between these two categories is that civilian types will not have any men-at-arms, while the military types will have title-bound men-at-arms. When civilian or military governors need military assistance, for example from peasant uprisings or worse, they can call in military governors as allies in these wars, usually requested via the Minister of War. Different circuit types will also look different on your government curriculum vitae, your merit. Governing these titles will grant more or less merit depending on their tax base size or the size of their armies. Please note, we're still heavily tweaking the advantages and disadvantages of each of these circuit types. The values you see in this video are not final and will be tweaked ahead of release. The standard administration is the most common type within the empire and designates an area that is governed primarily by civilian rule. It does not usually have access to personal men-at-arms or title-bound men-at-arms. The industrial administration is focused on production and long-term development. You can only have a limited amount of them active at any given time. It does not provide any title men-at-arms. Metropolitan administration, which is only available in the advancement area, is a circuit type focused on efficient administration of urban areas and urban development. It does not provide any title men-at-arms. Like the industrial administration, it is limited in the number you can have active at any time. The military administration type focuses on raising and maintaining titled men-at-arms and military defensiveness. Development growth is hampered and you can only have a limited amount of them. These will usually be set up on border circuits. The Protectorate administration is focused on creating a more independent military entity that could sustain and operate by itself. It can even independently expand its own realm on orders of the Emperor. It is only available when the Dynastic Cycle is in the expansion era and, like the others, is limited in number. This administration type is usually reserved for areas further away from the core lands of the Chinese hegemony. How do you prove that you would make a good Confucian ruler? Well, just like in the modern era, you have to take your exams. Exams are the way to get started on your career within Imperial China and other realms that have copied the system from them. You also get to choose your career path type, civilian or military. This choice determines what type of positions in the empire you will be considered for. The civilian path usually starts by obtaining a civilian governorship at a low title tier and goes all the way up to the Grand Chancellor, the right-hand man of the Emperor. The military path will see you sent off to defend the borders of the empire, first in military governorships, and perhaps coming to the capital as the Minister of War. The military path is also one where you will be commanded by the Emperor to wage wars or campaigns on their behalf. We have taken the traditional Chinese 9-rank system for merit, which results in a reverse of the usual number, going from rank 9 at the start to rank 1 at the best. Historically in Imperial China, there was a candidacy grade which was used for exams, and the service grade which was used when in office. For gameplay purposes, we have combined the two of these. Now we will read the words of Axel, one of the designers working on the examination activity in All Under Heaven. As previously mentioned, merit is key to securing government office. A character's merit score indicates how appropriate they are as an official in meritorious East Asian administrative government types. It represents their documented achievements and moral conduct according to Confucian ideals. An official with a high merit level has a higher candidate score and, if employed, a higher salary. Characters who were not yet employed as governors can attempt to increase their merit by attending examinations. The rank of merit also directly corresponds to how high a position a character can hold. Examinations can be taken from the age of 6 via the children's examination. You can set your children up for success by having them take the test, which increases their likelihood of attending higher level examinations. Next is the provincial level, another local examination, represented in-game as a multi-layered decision. Successfully passing this exam allows you to be considered for county-level appointments. More ambitious characters, however, might set their sights on the prestigious higher-level examinations. The Imperial Examination is an in-game activity openly hosted in the capital. It starts with the Metropolitan Examination, from which the top 10 entrants will move on to the exclusive Palace Examination, hosted by the Huangdi, or Emperor, himself. Apart from being generally gifted, being a good student of Confucius is important to secure a good score at the examinations. In order to prepare, the obtaining and leveling of the Confucian scholar trait can be achieved via studying at a university in China or by finding a Confucian elder. More about elders and disciples later in the video. Lastly, there are also other ways to succeed if you are not very gifted or you do not trust that the time you spent studying the Confucian classics will be enough. There were examinees that were known to try to bend the rules, if not outright cheat. For instance, by trying to get to know their examiners in advance. When playing inside of China, you will hold a family estate, to be built up over generations as a place to call your home. In some ways, this is similar to your family estate in the administrative government form from Roads to Power. This is where you can invest in permanent things that will keep benefiting your family across future generations, unlike the governorship lands, which you can only improve on behalf of the Emperor. Unlike in Byzantium, however, there will also be a different focus for what kind of benefits you may want. As an example, while you cannot guarantee a high merit score for your children, you can ensure that in your estate they are well educated as they grow up so that they may do well in their examinations. Another difference from the old domicile for administrative realms is that the things you can add to your family estate in a celestial realm will depend on what titles and offices you currently hold. Some things you will only be able to build if you achieve specific objectives in your career, such as reaching the position of minister in the central government. Like many other things in this dev diary, the estate itself is still under development. If you have suggestions for things you think we should cover here, then please let us know in the comments. In Imperial China, governors do not own the territory that they rule over. They govern it on behalf of the central government and by extension the emperor. The tax you levy isn't yours, it's the empire's. You're not supposed to spend all that money on building out your estate or to have fancy feasts. That would be corruption and is quite illegal. In this organized state, taxes are instead sent to the central government, which sends back resources earmarked for government use. In other words, a budget. Governors would receive salaries on top of this, which they could spend as they pleased. To represent this central flow of currency, we have implemented a new gold flow that is used by the celestial government, the Imperial Treasury system. It works as follows. As a vassal in the empire, all the taxes you collect from your sub-vassals and domain are sent upward to your liege, and they will send it upward similarly until it reaches the emperor. To contrast this, feudal vassals send only a relative percentage up to their liege and keep the rest. The emperor will convert a large percentage of this vassal income into treasury, a new resource that represents liquid assets that are supposed to be spent only on government tasks and investments. Whatever the emperor does not convert is added to the emperor's own coffers of gold. The emperor then sends this treasury downward to all of their governors based on the taxes collected by each governor, plus any adjustment specific for the title that they govern. Those vassals then send treasury down to their sub-vassals and so on. This could mean that you might receive more treasury from the central government than the taxes you were able to collect. For example, military governors in a protectorate border circuit out in the desert might receive more than they put in, since they are paying for a sizable army. At some point during the development of the treasury system, this flowchart was created, which has now been tweaked a bit for the dev diary. So, what can you spend treasury on? All official government business. In the celestial government, this translates to all holding buildings, provincial men-at-arms regiment costs, levy upkeep, most great project contributions, a few activities, and any salaries that you have to pay to your sub-vassals. Conversely, all the things that belong to you privately are paid for with gold, estate buildings, the rest of the activities, personal men-at-arms regiments, schemes, and a lot of court positions. At any moment, you can also put your personal gold into the treasury of your primary title, but you cannot take it back out again as personal funds. Additionally, treasury belongs to the primary title of the receiver. If you were to lose that title, the treasury would be lost alongside it. So building up personal wealth is harder in a centralized system. You have your estate, your salary, and any other shenanigans to get gold. Of course, there is also outright corruption, schemes and the like, and some shady decisions. Whenever you or another governor of the empire engages in this, the dynastic cycle inches more towards corruption. We have rebalanced gold costs for various existing systems to better reflect that circuit governors aren't actually as rich as kings, even though they are the same title tier. Rounding out celestial government, the emperor has a new legitimacy type called the Mandate of Heaven, which has some additional triggers and expectations. It's not always easy to receive the approval of the heavens after all. Should this legitimacy be lower than its expected level, then the Mandate of Heaven is in doubt, and change is in the air. As stated in our Vision Dev Diary, the Dynastic Cycle represents the ongoing cyclical nature of dynasties and power within Imperial China. Mechanically, the Dynastic Cycle is the tool we use to represent various different periods and ambitions of China within the game. The key periods that we want to be able to represent in All Under Heaven are the Tang Dynasty, an expansionist China with more powerful independent military governors. The 5 Dynasties and 10 Kingdoms period, a divided China where many states tried to claim the Mandate of Heaven and reunite China. The Song Dynasty, an inward-looking China where merit, innovation, prosperity, and scholarship were held in high regard. The Yuan Dynasty, a China that was conquered by an outside force, which then tried to adopt and adapt the imperial system. And the early Ming Dynasty, a stronger defensive China, where the emperor held more power over the government, with a revival of exams and cultural writings. Since we create an alternative history from the moment we unpause the game, we want these different dynasties and their policies and politics to be able to organically form and evolve over the course of the game. To do this, we created a new situation, a type of persistent geographically bounded system called the Dynastic Cycle, which can be in one of several possible eras or situation phases that can represent both the cyclical nature and different types of China that existed throughout history. Additionally, this situation gives China a mechanism that encourages it to be united again more easily under the mandate of heaven. Because if we add a pressure that encourages a cyclical fall, it needs a counter component for a cyclical rise. As a historical note, the Dynastic Cycle is a concept that was formalized during the period that CK3 represents, and its cyclical nature was discussed in depth by Chinese scholars. For example, Zhu Xi, a scholar during the Southern Song dynasty, argued that the dynastic decline was not inevitable, and that the loss of moral virtue and ethical discipline could be prevented if there is a structured society led by scholars who were guided by principle and moral clarity. Each era affects those within China in various significant ways. Aside from the usual modifiers on characters and counties, our aim is to also give each era things that are unlocked by them that are distinct and useful. These things can be additional laws and policies that can be enacted, new province types, new interactions towards others within China, great projects that can change society, warfare, or infrastructure significantly, and new casus belli. They can also take some things away to reflect a different nature of the realm during that period, such as restricting certain types of casus belli, and limiting or forbidding personal men-at-arms outright. For example, in the expansion era, the Grand Expansionist Command Army Command Structure law option is available, which enables larger title men-at-arms armies at the cost of a heavy burden on the vassals of China. As a disclaimer, not all effects are shown in the screenshot on screen now. Also, all of these mechanics are not final and have not yet been balanced. Each era is sorted into one of the three following categories, or era types. Stable era type represents a prosperous age. The empire is stable and the mandate of heaven is strongly held. These eras enable extra specialized laws, activity options, and represent, to a certain extent, the stated ambition of the government and emperor. If the emperor does not fulfill the ambition set forward by the stable era, they will suffer catalysts that drive the era closer to an unstable era. Generally speaking, stable eras transition only into unstable eras, and not into other stable eras directly. Whenever the mandate of heaven is not strongly held and the empire is not operating at its peak, the dynastic cycle is considered to be in an unstable era type. These eras signify that the cycle is turning downward, but it can still be turned around with a lot of effort. If you are an ambitious servant of the empire and you think that you can fulfill the mandate of heaven better than the current emperor, now might be the time to consider your options. Whenever the mandate of heaven is completely lost by the ruling dynasty, the empire is shattered, and the dynastic cycle enters an era full of uncertainty, wanton violence, regional independence, and potential that we call the chaotic era type. The advancement era is one of the stable era types. In this era, the empire is focusing on improving itself by looking inward. Through innovations, cultural excellence, prosperity of the people, and good meritorious Confucian governance. Offensive wars are more limited in this era, preferring instead to establish tributaries and other relationships. Great projects can be completed faster, with the focus of the empire being directed inward. Imperial exams can focus on producing the best governors that the empire has ever seen. Historically, the Northern Song period from 960 to 1127 AD would be in this era, and this is what China has at the 1066 start date. We also consider the Southern Song period of 1127 to 1279 to be in this era. Even though they suffered a great loss of territory to the north, it is teetering on the edge of an unstable era. As such, this is also the era active in our later start date of 1178. Please note that these effects are not final. We're still tweaking values here, especially around the limitations of wars. The expansion era is another stable empire type. In this era, the empire is focused on growing stronger through looking outward, pacifying frontiers, expanding its reach through military force, tributaries, and the Silk Road. The empire has more tools in its belt to expand, new casus belli, more armies, and the imperial exams can focus on generating great military strategists, and a specialized protectorate administration circuit type is unlocked. Inversely, there are some downsides to this era. Vassals that are not administrative might war amongst themselves. It is harder to integrate lands into an ever-expanding empire. Rebellions and unrest are more likely. Historically, the early and high Tang periods, from 618 to 756 AD, could be considered to be in this era. The early Ming period, from 1368 to 1424, could perhaps also considered to be in this era, until it turned more isolationist. As before, these effects are not final. We're still adjusting values here. The instability era is one of our unstable era types. The mandate of heaven is seen as wavering, either through corruption, popular unrest, foreign invasions, the emperor acting against their stated ambitions, non-meritorious behavior, or a combination or even all of the above. This is the general era that China can be in when things are uncertain. The bureaucratic apparatus is stuttering, bringing in less taxes. Corruption is easier to commit and more common. Populist and peasant factions are more likely to express their discontent through violence. Distant parts of the empire might drift away or even declare outright independence. Historically, the late Tang era from 756 to 907 AD could be considered to be in this era, pushed into it by the massive An-Lushan rebellion. This means that our early start date of 867 is in the instability era. As before, these effects are not final. We're also considering a separate reform unstable era to represent an era willingly entered into in order to reform from one stable era type to another. The conquest era is another unstable era type. The mandate of heaven has been taken by a force that is not inherently China. This era is specifically triggered when the hegemony of China title falls into the hands of someone who does not have a celestial government or cultural heritage that is not Chinese. Their government type will become celestial when the title is taken regardless. This era represents a time when the cultural cohesion of China is shaken, and with it, the mandate of heaven itself. This foreign emperor can try to adopt and earn the mandate of heaven to steer China into another stable era, or they can fall into a chaotic era where multiple forces strive for dominance. A conquest dynasty like this is also able to exert an aggressive outward expansion, since that is most likely what got them here in the first place. Additionally, they can try and make their culture dominant by preferring those of their own culture to hold governorships. Historically, the Yuan dynasty period from 1271 to 1294, which started when Mongols under Kublai Khan conquered the majority of southern Song, would be considered of this era type. As before, these effects are not final. We're likely to add more rebellions and uprisings along with other minuses similar to the instability era. And finally, the chaos era is a chaotic era type. When this era starts, the hegemony of China title is destroyed, and all direct vassals of the emperor become independent. Those ambitious enough can declare their own intent to claim the mandate of heaven and adopt a dynastic name for their realm. The celestial government type is continued to be valid for these realms, but no true emperor exists. The bureaucracy continues, but decentralized and less strong. Alliances are quickly drawn up between those sympathetic to one another or merely out of necessity. Historically, the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms period from 907 to 960 AD would be in this era. If you start in our early start date of 867, when Tang is in the instability era, you are very likely to end up here as well. What is divided can be reunited, however, through new casus belli that allow for wars to be plentiful, all in the name of the people and the mandate of heaven. If one ruler manages to control 75% or more of the de jure hegemony of China title, they can claim the mandate of heaven via decision and start a new imperial dynasty. They will be able to select their imperial dynasty name and select one of 5 Wuxing elements for their dynasty, coloring China on the map in one of 5 possible colors. Then, a new stable era of their choosing is selected, and the dynastic cycle turns once more. We've talked about all the different eras now, but we haven't told you how they would flow into each other and how you as a player can influence this. Similar to struggles from other DLCs, the Dynastic Cycle uses catalysts, triggered events with specific point values, to push eras from one to another. The Dynastic Cycle usually turns relatively slowly, and eras might last 100 years if you balance things right. The general flow of era change is stable to unstable to chaotic to stable and so on. There are exceptions, of course. Unstable eras can lead back to stable eras if the tide is turned, but generally speaking, this is not easy. Some eras might trigger from circumstances. Conquest eras specifically are usually triggered when a large war for the title of China itself is lost. Catalysts come into play primarily in the stable and unstable eras, and here are some examples from the advancement era towards the stability era. Some catalysts are immediate triggers for a new era because of their weight, such as the hegemon losing the mandate of heaven, their legitimacy is at rank 0, or a new house inherits the hegemony title. One-off catalysts, meanwhile, are things that you can cause yourself, such as the hegemon losing a war, the imperial capital being raided or besieged, a member of the imperial house is murdered, or a governor embezzles from the central government. Other catalysts are more symptoms of corruption and/or incompetence. For example, the Imperial Treasury being empty, the hegemon appointing a low-merit counselor, or failing to uphold imperial exams. Our intent with these catalysts is to give players more tools to directly start or stop catalysts from happening, so that even though the era might change slowly, inevitably, you can help things along or delay them significantly. Please note that catalysts are still very much under development. We're likely to remove, add, rebalance, or anything else to any number of them. Now we're going to read the words of PDS Archie, one of the designers working on the Dynastic Cycle and other China mechanics in All Under Heaven. One of the new mechanics they're responsible for is political movements within China. Unlike in Byzantium, Chinese governors can share values that transcend their personal goals. Using the Situation Participant Group feature, we've created 4 distinct political movements in the Dynastic Cycle situation. Pro-Dynasty. Characters in this group support the Emperor in everything. Expansion. They want to change the Dynastic Cycle to the Expansion era. Advancement. They want to change the Dynastic Cycle to the Advancement era. And Conservative. This movement wants to go back to the old ways and seek to empower the nobility instead of the bureaucrats. There is also an unaligned group that doesn't have any unique mechanics and doesn't represent any specific values, but its members are susceptible to being persuaded to join other movements. In history, during the Song Dynasty, the notable reformer Wang Onshi would be the leader of the advancement movement, and Sima Guang leader of the conservative movement. They would debate policy before the emperor himself, eventually leading to the implementation of Wang Onshi's new policies. These two movements would clash over 40 years in ethical factionalism, with ruthless purges of each other. Each movement is affected by the Dynastic Cycle eras in a different way, through character modifiers and unique unlocks. Movements will support their members by using friendly interactions and schemes between each other, and hostile against other movements. Will also have access to unique interactions, decisions, etc., or unique options within them. Some of those will trigger a catalyst that will move the Dynastic Cycle in a specific direction. When instability, catalysts will push towards instability, while in instability they can either push to chaos or back to stability. Each political movement has a leader. A movement leader has access to the emperor and can issue a unique petition via decision to further their movement's goals or to help fellow members of their movement. In order to become a leader, you have to prove yourself in front of other members and defeat the current leader in a political debate. As a movement leader, you can also engage in another type of debate in front of the emperor to win imperial favor, leading to your political movement becoming empowered, which grants it even more powers to grow the movement and change Dynastic Cycle eras. The movement's clout is expressed in a movement power value, which is a collection of personal movement power of all its members. There are various ways to increase the power, some permanent, while others temporary. We have also added a new type of relation, elder and disciple, to further highlight the social connections and hierarchy. The relation is tied to merit. A disciple needs to have less merit than the elder, otherwise the relation cannot be established or ends amicably. Two main ways of acquiring disciples is to convince them to join your movement or mentor them directly through a new political scheme. Disciples also lend their movement power to the elder. In the chaos era, political movements disband, but the relation prevails. The connections you made will help you keep your power base and quickly establish the mandate of heaven in your favor. Movements will contest each other, and a wise emperor will make sure that there is a balance between movements, lest they create a movement with so much power that it could operate the empire without him. We tried to limit the size of our dev diary somewhat, to not info dump too much on players all at once, so we'll wrap it up here for now. However, we will cover a little teaser here for more China-related mechanics that we'll discuss in the near future. Hegemonic tributaries are formed when outside rulers acknowledge the hegemony, and in turn receive recognition, economic benefits, and more from China. On the subject of great projects, we didn't mention the Great Wall or the Grand Canal or other obviously Chinese great projects, but rest assured these will be covered in a future dev diary. And finally, border warfare. We're currently experimenting with allowing realms to wage war on sub-vassals of large realms in certain circumstances, without immediately drawing in the top liege of that realm. This gives larger empires like the Chinese Empire more local military delegation, and also introduces a new type of threat to these empires. Please let us know what you think of all of these features. Many are still work in progress, and the more we hear from you, the better we can adjust them to your liking. Our next dev diary will be about Japan, its territories, and the various mechanics represented there. We'll see you all next time, and as always, thank you for watching. If you want to stay up to date with everything Crusader Kings 3, then like this video and subscribe to the channel.